An arrogant Aikido champion boldly calls out Steven Seagal in front of a packed crowd. But what unfolded in the first round left him stunned and full of regret. "Man, if that Seagal guy is all that, tell him to show up and spar. I'm ready whenever." That line echoed across the polished hardwood floor of the Challenger Dojo, tucked inside a busy strip mall just off Ventura Boulevard in Los Angeles, 1990. At the center of the room stood Chris Talbot, a lean, sharp-faced 20-year-old black belt with spiked blonde hair and a mouth that often moved faster than his wrists. His GI was spotless white, sleeves rolled high, and on his chest was a custom patch that read, "No mercy, no excuses." Chris was the kind of practitioner people either wanted to be or beat. He'd earned his black belt in just under 3 years, trained under Sensei Yamamoto, and had racked up a dozen tournament wins in the last 6 months. His joint locks were precise, his throws vicious, and his confidence completely unchecked. But lately, his spotlight has been getting a little crowded. The name Steven Seagal had been floating around like wildfire. Movie magazines, martial arts monthlies, even daytime talk shows. Clips of him demonstrating fluid, effortless throws and wrist movements were circulating in Hollywood theaters and martial arts circles. Some people said he was the future. Others whispered that he was unbeatable. Chris didn't buy it. "I've seen the footage," he said, glancing at a grainy TV screen mounted in the dojo's corner. On it, Seagal was calmly talking about Aikido, how it wasn't a technique, but a concept like water flowing without form, using the opponent's energy against them. "That stuff won't work in a real fight. Looks good on camera, sure, but out here he'd crumble. This ain't the movies." One of the younger students, a nervous teen named Mikey, spoke up. "Didn't he train with real masters, though? And didn't he beat guys twice his size?" Chris smirked. "Stories, hype. You put a man like that in the ring with someone like me, someone who's trained in real combat, and he'd fold by the first round." That's when he said it loudly, with intent. "If Steven Seagal's really what they say he is, tell him to come find me. I'll show him what a black belt really looks like." It was arrogance, pure, unfiltered. But it didn't stay within the walls of the dojo. A visiting jiu-jitsu coach from Long Beach overheard it and passed it along to a kendo instructor in Santa Monica. Within 3 days, the challenge had traveled across the city like a lit match in dry grass. And on the 4th day, a stranger walked into the dojo during evening drills. He was small-framed, older, dressed in a brown mandarin-collared shirt. He bowed deeply, respectfully, and handed Sensei Yamamoto a sealed envelope. No words, just a message. The dojo was quiet when Sensei Yamamoto opened the letter. His eyes scanned the paper, his brows lifted slightly. Then he looked straight at Chris. "It's from Steven Seagal," he said simply. Chris stood up, heartbeat pulsing through his neck. He wrote back. Yamamoto nodded. He accepts the challenge, but on his terms. A hushed excitement swept the students. Mikey leaned forward. "What terms?" Yamamoto read aloud. "No press, no students, no audience. A private sparring match at the Los Angeles Martial Club. 3 rounds. Controlled contact. No winner, no loser, only clarity." Chris scoffed. So he wants to hide from the cameras, afraid to lose his Hollywood image. Yamamoto said nothing, but his silence was pointed. Chris looked over the paper again. There was an address, a date, July 29th, a week from now. Time, 10 a.m. sharp. "I'll be there," Chris said, folding the paper. "And I'm not holding back." But in the days that followed, something subtle began to shift. For all of Chris's bravado, the gym's atmosphere turned heavier. Sparring partners became more cautious. His sensei grew distant. There was talk in the community that Seagal wasn't just a flashy guy on screen. He had real technique, dangerous precision, and an unpredictable style that didn't follow the rigid rules of competitive Aikido. One evening, while Chris practiced immobilization techniques on the heavy bag, Yamamoto finally spoke. "Steven Seagal is not your enemy," he said. Chris wiped sweat from his brow. "He's just another man." "Maybe," Yamamoto said. "But some men are forged in ways you cannot see." That night, Chris couldn't sleep. He started rewatching every clip of Steven Seagal he could find. Slowed down frames, analyzing stances, breathing patterns, but it was no use. The man didn't fight like anyone Chris had ever seen. No telegraphed movements, no repeated patterns, just flow. It got under Chris's skin. Not fear exactly, just unease. But he buried it beneath more training, more push-ups, more kata, more shadow boxing at 2 a.m. If he was going to fight Steven Seagal, he'd do it with everything he had. The morning of the match arrived fast. Chris showed up to the Los Angeles Martial Club with just his mouth guard and gloves. The building was quiet, tucked behind a nondescript row of offices. He expected maybe some press, a photographer or two. Instead, it was almost empty. Inside, he found only 4 people. The timekeeper, Mr. Chong, Seagal's Data Ryu associate, a silent gym assistant, and Steven Seagal himself. He stood alone in the center of the room, stretching silently, wearing black kung fu pants and a white tank. He looked relaxed, small, almost unimpressive in person. Chris's confidence surged back. "This him?" he whispered to Mr. Chong, nodding. Mr. Chong nodded back. He came alone. Chris let out a faint chuckle. "Then this will be over quick." Seagal approached, bowed deeply, and said, "Let's keep it respectful. We both walk out upright." Chris nodded, but didn't bow. "Respect's earned," he muttered under his breath. The timekeeper clapped once and called, "First round, begin." Seagal didn't move. Chris stepped forward, fists up, breathing steady. Then he charged and missed. The second Chris lunged, he realized something was off. He'd aimed his signature wrist lock transition straight for Seagal's arm. Fast, clean, sharp. But Seagal wasn't there anymore. In a split second, Seagal had shifted his weight, stepped off the center line, and blended just far enough to let the strike pass by. Chris stumbled slightly, regaining balance. He blinked. How was he already behind? Seagal didn't counter. He just stared, breathing slowly, controlled. Chris tried again. A flurry this time, left jab, low sweep, rising elbow, nothing. Seagal slipped every move like he'd practiced them 10 minutes earlier. The room stayed dead silent, except for the soft shuffles of bare feet on the mat and the occasional exhale from Seagal. It was almost too quiet, no cheering, no corner coach yelling advice. 30 seconds in, Chris finally landed something. A glancing tap on Seagal's rib with a back fist. But Seagal didn't even flinch. He didn't react with anger or ego. He simply pivoted, dropped his weight, and redirected Chris's center with a slight hand movement that knocked him back a full step. It wasn't hard. It wasn't flashy, but it hit deep. Chris froze. It wasn't pain. It was realization. Seagal was reading him like a book. With 20 seconds left in the round, Seagal made his first real move. He advanced. Not fast, not wild, just calmly, confidently. Chris backed away trying to keep space, but Seagal shortened the gap with one skip step and suddenly feinted a grab toward the shoulder. Tap, a redirect toward the wrist. Tap, a palm strike that stopped half an inch from Chris's chest. Time slowed, then ding. End of round. Chris stood in the center of the mat, winded, eyes wide. Seagal bowed and stepped back. Not a drop of sweat on him. No adrenaline-fueled aggression, just stillness. Mr. Chong approached with a bottle of water. "How do you feel?" Chris sat down slowly. "I don't get it. He's not even hitting me." Chong smiled faintly. "That's not the point." Chris didn't respond. He was still staring at Seagal, who sat cross-legged, completely at peace. For the first time in his short but successful career, Chris felt like he wasn't fighting a man. He was fighting himself. Round 2 was supposed to be Chris's comeback. At least that's what his mind told him. He stood up, adjusted his GI, cracked his knuckles, and this time he bowed. A real one, deep, intentional. Seagal acknowledged it with a nod. Then the timekeeper's clap echoed through the gym again. "Begin." Chris didn't charge this time. He waited. Seagal stepped forward slowly. No tension in his body, just rhythm, like he was walking through water. Then, without warning, he exploded. A lightning-quick jab towards Chris's shoulder forced a reflex block, but it was a feint. In a blink, Seagal dipped low and swept Chris's front foot with a crescent leg movement that didn't knock him over, but staggered him. As Chris tilted backward, Seagal rose up and executed a finger strike that stopped just an inch from Chris's left eye. A cold chill ran down Chris's spine. If Seagal had wanted to blind him, he could have. Just like that, the pressure, the speed, the control. Like Seagal had measured his reach, his angle, and Chris's reaction before the match even started. Chris stumbled back, breathing heavily. He reset his stance, tried to calm his nerves. His heart was racing, his muscles twitching. He launched a spinning back kick, his most practiced move. Seagal stepped into it, not away, and tapped Chris's spinning leg with just enough contact to shift his rotation. The result: Chris landed awkwardly and nearly tripped. Then Seagal did something that shattered Chris's last defense. He spoke. "You're not here to win. You're here to learn." Chris froze. Nobody talked during a fight. Not unless they were taunting. But this wasn't a taunt. It was instruction. Seagal continued calmly. You're strong, fast, but you're stuck. You're trapped in forms and habits. Chris hesitated, still on guard. Seagal advanced, but again, not to strike, but to push Chris into reaction. And he did. A sloppy jab, a miss, and an off-balance step. And before he knew it, Seagal was behind him again. Like he'd been there all along, waiting for Chris to catch up. The timekeeper called out. 20 seconds. Seagal eased back. He lowered his stance slightly, exhaled deeply, and said, "Be like water." Chris was sweating through his GI now. Not from exertion, but from clarity. It was happening. The regret. He felt it in the first round, but it crashed like a wave in the second. Not because he was getting hit, but because he wasn't even being fought. He was being taught. The round ended this time. Chris didn't sit. He simply stood in place, breathing silent. Seagal walked over, extended a hand, and said, "You're not weak, but you're still full." Chris didn't quite understand. Mr. Chong clarified, walking forward. Seagal always said, "An empty cup can be filled, but you came here with a full one." Chris nodded slowly. Chris didn't need the third round. He didn't want it. By the end of the second, he already knew. He had regretted calling out Steven Seagal in the first round, not because he was bruised or beaten, but because he hadn't understood what he was even asking for. He had challenged a man, believing it would earn him validation, a trophy, respect, maybe headlines. But all Seagal gave him was silence, clarity, and skill so clean it made Chris feel like a beginner again. Seagal stepped away and motioned to Mr. Chong. "We're done," he said simply. Chris didn't argue. He bowed, this time lower than before, and walked off the mat, eyes low. There was no crowd to boo, no camera to zoom in on his humbled face, just a creaky gym for quiet men, and the sound of Seagal grabbing a towel from the corner. As Seagal walked toward the exit, Chris found the courage to speak. "Wait." Seagal paused, turned. Chris took a breath. "What happens now?" Seagal raised an eyebrow. "Now you decide what kind of martial artist you want to be." Chris blinked. "I thought I was already one." Seagal smiled, not smugly, but with quiet patience. "You were," he said. "Now you're ready to be a better one." Mr. Chong approached Chris gently. "He doesn't fight to win," he said. "He fights to wake people up." Chris sat on the mat, legs crossed, staring at the place he had stood when he made his first move. He stayed there long after Seagal left. He had walked into that room as an Aikido champion, but he walked out knowing he was only just beginning to understand what that meant. 3 weeks later, the mat at Challenger Dojo had a different energy. Chris no longer barked orders at junior belts. He didn't mock students who messed up or brag about his wins or name-drop his tournaments. He trained quietly, diligently. And when Sensei Yamamoto spoke, he listened. One evening while class wrapped up, Mikey, the young teen from earlier, approached Chris. "So, did you really spar Steven Seagal?" he asked nervously. Chris chuckled. "I met him." "Did you beat him?" Chris paused. "No," he said, "but he beat something out of me." Mikey looked confused. "Like knocked you out?" Chris smiled. "No, he knocked the noise out of my head." "That's harder." Sensei Yamamoto, who had overheard, stepped in. Chris learned the difference between fighting and understanding. Most never do. Later that night, alone in the dojo, Chris stood in front of the mirror and performed a joint lock kata. Not fast, not sharp, but thoughtful. He paused between each move, focusing not on perfection, but on awareness. His body moved like water, not fire. And just before locking up, he reached into his gym bag and pulled out a folded envelope, the same one Seagal had sent weeks ago. He opened it again. We read the words, "No winner, no loser, only clarity." Chris picked up a brush and dipped it in ink. On a sheet of paper, he wrote, "An empty cup is ready to be filled." Then he pinned it to the wall above the mat. Years later, Chris would go on to open his own school, not Talbot Aikido, but the Empty Cup Martial Studio. The logo was a simple water ripple. No black belts on the walls, no trophies in glass cases. He never bragged about the time he sparred Steven Seagal. In fact, he never brought it up unless someone asked directly. And even then, he'd only say, "He didn't fight me. He showed me how to stop fighting myself." And in the back of the studio, in a small frame near the office, hung an old black and white photo. A blurry still of a gym mat. 2 men in silence. No applause, no knockouts, just a lesson that changed everything.